It's that time of the week, folks, when I give my thoughts on the latest news and something that's particularly exercising me. Now, today's Sunday sermon has got a fair amount of detail, so do focus because it is important. For the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about dodgy climate data and the gradual possible death of net zero. And firstly, I obviously want to produce my usual confirmation. Of course, we all know that climate change is real. After all, it's been going on for billions and billions of years. And yes, we're in a period of some warming. But the real question that we should be allowed to debate and discuss is how much warming are we really actually seeing? Not only is that open to debate, but I also think that there is dodgy data out there that is trying to accentuate the quantity of warming. And that's what I'll be talking about further on, because some of this data, and I've already shown it, is being fiddled, it's being fudged, perhaps more than anybody actually realises. And then, of course, if climate change existed for billions of years, well, it's going to continue for billions more years to come, surely. Now, I know that there's lots of eco-cultists and zealots out there who are listening, who are waiting for me to trip up on this issue and to try and cancel me and take me down. A few have been trying in the last week or so. Good luck with that, folks. The truth is that the agenda of the climate cult is to terrify us, it's to control us, it's to manipulate us. And I'm not having it, and I hope you're not having it. And here's some evidence that raises yet more doubt in the minds, I think, of all of us, that we need to be reminded of, about the way that data has been manipulated, not just in the last couple of weeks that I've talked about with the Met Office and BBC Weather. No. I'm going to take you back 28 years to 1995, to the Madrid UN conference, when a famous Antarctic ice core researcher, Andrei Kapitsa, he said large numbers of documents critical to the global warming theory were submitted to the UN conference and then vanished without trace. And as a result, the discussion was one-sided and heavily biased. And so the UN declared then that global warming to be a scientific fact. In 1998, the same Andrei Kapitsa said in London in a conference, claims that the Antarctica ice sheet was shrinking were absolute nonsense. This is a guy who knew more about the Antarctic ice sheet probably than anybody else. He discovered Lake Vostok underneath Antarctica, was one of those very involved with it. So that was 95. Let me take you back just 14 years ago to 2009 in what was the greatest climate fraud possibly to date. It was called ClimateGate, so significant was it, when hundreds of emails were released by a whistleblower that showed that certain individuals at the University of East Anglia, they were talking about that temperatures were not rising as fast as expected, and so they had to adjust and fiddle the data to halt the decline in temperatures, and that they were using a well-known trick to make it look as though temperatures were rising. This was backed up, of course, by the Met Office report in 2013 that's now very hard to get hold of and no one talks about, which talked back then that there'd been a pause in global warming for 15 years from 1998 to 2013. This ClimateGate fraud, this inquiry, resulted in 5 separate inquiries. But some of those were not very good inquiries, to the point where a prominent Labour MP at the time described one as a whitewash. Christopher Booker, the well-known author, he said at the time it was the greatest scientific scandal of a generation. You had the former Colorado in the United States, the state climatologist, Roger Peake, say there was a huge conflict of interest at the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. People were doing the research and then assessing their own research to produce reports that fit the political agenda. I repeat, that fit the political agenda. He said that scientific rigour has been sacrificed. You've got a former UN IPCC reviewer, Vincent Gray, in November 2009, said, "I long ago realised that they were faking the whole exercise." These are former UN IPCC people. Others were more blunt. Will Alexander, who was a biosystems engineering member of the UN Scientific and Technical Committee on Natural Disasters, a UN committee no less, he said that the IPCC was a worthless carcass and that the then chair, Rajendra Pachauri, was a disgrace. He described deliberate manipulation to suit political objectives, with fraudulent science being exposed. This is not my words, folks. These are former people who worked at the UN, who worked in the IPCC. Another IPCC scientist, a Japanese, Kiminori Ito, an award-winning physical chemist, he turned his back on the IPCC climate panel, saying, "Global warming fears are the worst scientific scandal in history." Those are his words. He then went on to say, "When people come to know the truth, they will feel deceived by science and by scientists." These are IPCC members. These are chemists. These are physicists. A South African nuclear physicist, also a coordinating lead author for the IPCC, one Philip Lloyd, he said the quantity of CO2 that man produces is insignificant in terms of the natural circulation between air, water and soil. He then said, "I've found examples where the IPCC summaries say precisely the opposite of what the scientists said in the technical detail." Another at the time said, "There's a 3-month delay between the production of the IPCC summaries for policymakers and then the actual detailed technical working policy report that comes some 3 months later." And the reason for that was to make the necessary adjustments to the technical report to ensure that it matched the summary. Surely it should be the other way around, folks. You produce the technical report and then the summary. Do you see what's going on here? Even their own reviewers, their own coordinating authors have fessed up that actually a lot of these summaries fitted a political agenda. And then it's absolutely confirmed. The chief of the IPCC, one Rajendra Pachauri, in 2013 admitted to The Guardian, no less, that the IPCC was at government's beck and call. And he quotes, "If governments decide we should do things differently and come up with a different set of products, we would be at their beck and call." Does that sound like science to you folks? It doesn't to me. I thought the whole point about producing scientific evidence was that it couldn't be manipulated by politicians with an agenda. So why on earth should we trust these types of people when anecdotes do not match what supposedly the science is saying? Just remember, there's no such thing as the science. And this is what proves it. Now, even some of the believers, the eco-cultists, will admit that this was a bad period, a disgraceful period. Now, they'll say that lessons have been learned and it won't happen again. We hear all this stuff time and again, don't we? But they're still at it. In 2017, 8 years later, the climate policy researcher and author Donna Laframboise said political revision is central to how IPCC reports are produced. I repeat that. Political revision is central to how IPCC reports are produced. And just this week, we've got the chief of the UN, the boss, the ultimate boss, the Secretary General no less, one Antonio Guterres, saying that the period of global warming is over. We're now into global boiling. So where's the scientific evidence that we're into global boiling? Surely you get the evidence first and then it sort of bubbles all the way up to the chief. No. He's just proved what I've just been saying in this sermon. That the bosses, the politicians They give the narrative, they set the agenda, and then the scientists and the technical reports and the evidence has to be adjusted, tweaked, manipulated in order to match that agenda. He has literally just this week proved my very point. And in the last 2 weeks, I've shown that the Met Office has been fiddling the Central England temperature for hundreds of years, tweaked it, and so that from sort of 1970 until 2000, it looked a bit colder. In order from 2000 onwards, it would look warmer, and that the rate of growth of warming would look steeper. Even though the same Met Office had to admit in 2013 that there'd been a pause in global warming for 15 years. They don't seem to admit that now, do they? I wonder why. I then showed last week the BBC weather had got things catastrophically wrong in the middle of the previous week. At best, they were providing misleading information. At worst, they were deliberately trying to frighten us. They misread the European Space Agency data. They took land surface temperatures, we think, as opposed to air temperature 2 metres above ground. So embarrassed with the BBC that on Monday, the day after my sermon, they produced a tweet setting out how accurate they'd been for a day and that they'd got it right. I think they're running scared. I think we've absolutely sussed what's going on here. And I think we've got to keep battling away. And I've got a graph that hopefully those of you who are watching can now see that's been produced by The Lancet medical journal, supposed a bastion of medical science. Here it is, where they seem to have manipulated. What this shows in the blue lines is the number of people in different countries who die from extreme cold. And then in the brown on the right-hand side of the graph, you see those who die in the same countries of extreme heat. And it looks as though a few more die of cold than of warmth. But they had manipulated the x-axis of the extreme cold deaths in order to reduce the difference between the two. You'll now see on the screen the actual graph with the same x-axis. Hopefully that will come up on the screen, which shows something completely different. I'm hoping that comes up. What that shows, and here it is, you can barely see the number of extreme deaths compared to the extreme deaths from heat compared to the extreme deaths from cold. That is the accurate x-axis. Because as I've said before, and many others have, about 10 times more people die of extreme cold than extreme heat. So even The Lancet has been manipulating the data, manipulating graphs. And I did ask them to come on the show to explain themselves, but they declined. So here we are. It goes on and on and on. From the 90s to the late 2000s to the mid-2010s. And here we are in the 2020s. This stuff is still going on. So when people talk to you about the science, there's no such thing. You've always got to challenge the data. Even supposed fact checkers. Turns out when they're paid by Facebook, Google and WhatsApp, again, you've got to question the fact checkers. And I repeat to finish, yes, of course climate change is real. It's been going on for billions of years. And we're in a period of some warming. What I'm questioning is the extent of that warming. What I'm questioning is actually, is that a problem? Or actually, could it actually be a good thing? These are questions we should genuinely be allowed to discuss and debate in a rational fashion. And what I'm also questioning is the accuracy, the veracity, the truth about the data. Because if it's being fiddled, then huge decisions are made on the back of dodgy data that impact on us all. And just to finish on some good news, in June in the US, maximum temperatures was at a 129-year average. It was the third lowest for the last 18 years. And in July the 26th, Arctic sea ice was at a record 14-year high. You don't hear the good news on the mainstream media, but you do hear it here at the home of common sense and truth, Talk TV. Here endeth my Sunday sermon.